I'd like to expatiate more on my reasons why recently I've been weighing more in favor of conscious realism, and why I think, um, you know, physicalism is going nowhere, because basically the doctrine of physicalism has shown that it cannot explain how one can derive um, felt sensations of qualia from a purely mechanistic process um, involving non-conscious elements. Um, Basically, the impasse within the doctrine of materialism is very, very salient. So you can't get anywhere with it. I don't see, intuitively speaking, um, no matter how much some scientists, try to convince you that the physical world can explain absolutely every phenomena, including consciousness. Um, there is a deep mystery there. I mean, obviously, mental faculties and cognitive abilities do seem to correlate with neural activity, absolutely. But experience itself, that very pristine awareness, um, just doesn't enter the equation. Um, Obviously, if your brain is affected somehow via cerebral malfunction or some type of damage, it will affect the way you feel about yourself and how you relate to the world and the way you feel about the world, undeniably. But it doesn't explain that pristine cognition that remains. Um, and even when scientists point to the fact that a good blow to the back of your head, say, can render you unconscious, well, if it can render you unconscious and you cease to experience the passage of time of this reality, and I should say this reality because I'm going to make a good point after this, and hopefully I won't ramble for too long. It doesn't mean that you are in that unconsciousness. You will never be in unconsciousness. That's not who you are. Basically, who we are, all of us, is consciousness itself. It never ceases to be. I mean, that's what I'm starting to believe anyway. It never ceases to be. And even though when we look at things, when we examine the way things appear to be, how we perceive the world, and what comes to mind, what flares up in our focus, we don't have all the memories that we could have available to us at any given time. And even though memory interrelates closely with consciousness, they are not the same thing. And basically, we don't yet understand memory enough, or how memories are even formed in our brains, to be able to say that when we are unconscious, there's definitely absolutely no experience that we have ceased to exist or to be. It could be the case that something else is experienced. Maybe not of this world, but perhaps we have otherworldly experiences when we're supposed to be unconscious, and when we come to, we simply forget because our focus shifts to this reality, the contents of this reality, and we, in order to survive as human beings, we need to become immediately aware of our surroundings from this perspective, which I'm starting to think is a limited perspective. So the brain is actually something that, because it's made of atoms, and these atoms exist in, they're wave functions that exist in superpositions, and therefore neurons don't really exist until someone looks at them or makes a measure of them. This is according to the Copenhagen interpretation. So how can neurons ever produce consciousness if neurons don't even exist prior to making an observation? So we have many questions regarding consciousness, and to me, if we pay attention to our first-hand experience, we can see, we can become aware of the primacy of consciousness. Nothing can be said to exist without consciousness. So, and everything else can be an illusion, but consciousness, but awareness itself. So, if our focus shifts to this reality, and we have indeed experienced something in that period of unconsciousness when our brains weren't supposed to process anything from this reality, we might have been experiencing something outside this space-time, or some other type of experience which we then forget. And maybe not everyone forgets what's supposed to happen during that period. Anyway, there's a lot that relies on reports, and thing is, what's really made me think or weigh more heavily towards say conscious realism or idealism is a number of events that have happened recently. Not just the fact that I like the ideas of Donald Hoffman, but Donald Hoffman has in fact got my attention to these recent events in the scientific community. But Donald Hoffman has an amazing theory where consciousness underpins reality. Absolutely everything that we see around us cannot be without consciousness. So consciousness is fundamental and prior to space-time. So the only reality is conscious agents, and from conscious agents you get decorated permutations, and these decorated permutations exist inside geometries, mathematical shapes that have to exist outside space and time, the space and time of this universe. And these decorated permutations form an amplituhedron, and this amplituhedron then goes on symmetrically to describe the properties of the particles or wave functions that we see that are manifest in this reality. It describes practically everything: spin, momentum, mass, everything else perfectly. And so much so that within space-time isn't fundamental they are also a feature of this projection. It's like a medium. The space-time fabric is a medium within which all these properties find expression, and it gives rise to Markovian dynamics, where a single particle is influenced by the system at large and moves according to probabilities and how the system operates, and its ergodicity, which has to do with the system itself exploring all possible outcomes. And basically, if Donald Hoffman also tells us that if mathematics is infinite, and we see that only a fraction of maths finds expression in our reality, then what we see around us is only a smidgen of what is actually possible. So, but consciousness undergirds every manifestation and gives rise to infinities within infinities, and it gives rise to everything that's possible and beyond, according to Cantor's infinities. And I'm not even sure I'm doing this justice, but you'd have to listen to Donald Hoffman for a more in-depth articulation of these ideas. But basically, at the Large Hadron Collider, when they smash protons together and they get subatomic particles, new subatomic particles, and they have their own trajectories. Physicists have been having a hard time describing these trajectories under the assumption that space-time is fundamental, and what they end up with is endless pages of algebraic equations, right, just to describe a single trajectory. But all it took is for someone to say, what if we drop the assumption that space-time is fundamental? What if we regard space-time as a feature and not the basics, the roots of reality? And let's see what we get. And immediately, the pages of complex equations turned into one page. The maths got simpler, and not just that, new symmetries and geometries began to emerge that made the scientists think, well, who ordered that? So that's one event, which is quite significant. And just last year, a trio of scientists won the Nobel Prize in Physics for proving local realism to be false. This is to do with, the long-held belief amongst physicists since the days of Einstein and his critique of quantum theory. The Einstein-Podolsky-Rosen paradox paper, basically stating that, local realism has to be true, and basically that means that particles can only be influenced by other particles in the vicinity, and the interaction or their influence cannot exceed the speed of light. That was proven to be false by the trio of physicists last year. Their names are John Clauser, the American, And then you have the Austrian Anton Zeilinger and the French guy Alain Aspect. These men have been testing Bell's theorem since the early 70s, and basically Bell's theorem went largely ignored by the scientific community for a long time prior to the 70s, until John Clauser found it in a local library, and he got in touch with Bell and he said, well, has anyone tested your theory and your paper? And John Bell said, no, you're the first one to contact me about it. Basically, Bell's theorem and this is where the results from the trio of scientists violated Bell's inequalities. What this means is, within his theorem, there's a limit, and had the results from John Clauser's experiments, John Clauser and co, had his results been under Bell's limit, then it would prove local realism to be true. It would prove that Einstein was right about hidden variables in reality explaining the spooky action at a distance. But the results were above the limit, which means that local realism is false. And basically, reality is really weird. That's what happened. Local realism is false, and basically the reasons for it weren't the same reasons as John von Neumann. John von Neumann said that there could not be hidden variables in reality, and Bell's theorem actually proved his reasons to be wrong, but didn't prove that there were no hidden variables. It didn't prove that local realism is false, but it did. His paper, Bell's theorem, practically is a mathematical expression, a very complex one, understood by experts, which begs to be tested to find out the truth. And that's what these scientists recently did, and they got the Nobel Prize last year. And basically they had refined since the 70s their experiment, and they made sure there were no loopholes, and they were able to test for correlation multiple times using multiple paired particles. I think they reached about over 700 entangled photons, and the result is conclusive. So anyway, that's an amazing piece of history in the world of physics, in the annals of science, that will surely be remembered. I really do believe that very soon there will be a scientific revolution, because not many physicists are aware of what's just happened. Only a few that deal in high energy physics, and most of the young graduates are too focused on their own fields to be aware of what's going on. And excuse me, apart from this, this year we have a conference attended by several experts to discuss consciousness, and none of them arrived at a consensus. You get eliminativists, whose views I don't buy, because they practically state that consciousness is some kind of illusion. I completely reject that idea. It doesn't resonate with me whatsoever. If there is anything in this world that cannot be an illusion, that is consciousness. You had eliminativists, you had physicalists, you had epiphysicalists, you had panpsychists, you had all sorts, and none of them agreed. And then you also one also has to take into account that the leading theory of consciousness, Tononi's integrated information theory, was panned by many renowned experts the world over to be a pseudoscience. And also the results from Christoph Koch's research to try and map out consciousness according to neural correlates. He didn't get the results that they expected, that were expected to that would back Tononi's theory, and on top of that, it fails to explain consciousness. I'm pretty sure it's a wonderful piece of research regarding the soft problems of consciousness and cognitive abilities and how they correlate with brain activity, but it's in no way an explanation for conscious experience itself, the phenomenon of consciousness. And another thing I would like to mention very briefly is that a lot of people seem to be confused about the nature of intelligence, or its meaning, and consciousness, which people also tend to be confused about. Consciousness isn't the same as intelligence, and just because you become more intelligent doesn't mean that you become more conscious. And just because you become more conscious doesn't mean you become more intelligent. There seems to be this widespread belief that with the advent of AI, and the more intelligent machines become, or the more intelligence machines display, that the more conscious they'll become, or they are more likely to be conscious if they display a high level of intelligence far beyond Alan Turing's test. I'm pretty sure there are lots of learning programs out there that have already passed the Turing test with flying colours. But anyway, I don't think intelligence is a good indication of consciousness, that something is conscious, because you can have an animal like a chicken. There is this theory proposed by, and it's a physicalist theory, and I'm only going to express it here because it destroys that notion, but at the same time it doesn't. I don't subscribe to it, but for the purposes of illustrating why I think intelligence isn't a good marker for consciousness, I'm going to try and sum it up as briefly as I can here. Basically, Nicholas Humphrey, in his book Sentience, The Invention of Consciousness, he states that only mammals and birds are conscious because they are warm-blooded, and therefore their homeostasis generates enough energy in their brains to power feedback loops, and in the brains of humans it gives rise to what he calls an ipsundrum, And from sentition, he uses these words from sentition, which is more to do with unconscious reflexes and reactions. Once it starts to make self-representations, and it loops these self-representations, it gives rise to phenomenal consciousness. So there's a leap of faith there. It doesn't really explain, but that's what he reckons happens. So, but anyway, within his theory, mammals and birds are conscious, but not reptiles and mollusks. Reptiles and mollusks, say snakes, lizards, octopi, they are simply complex automata. They don't possess phenomenal consciousness. They simply react to their environments mechanistically with no subjective experience whatsoever. And this is interesting to me because it's useful in separating intelligence from consciousness. And basically, if you look at an octopus can display high levels of intelligence compared to a chicken. And yet, he would say that the chicken is conscious, but not the octopus. So, I think that his theory is useful in illustrating just how divorced from consciousness intelligence is. So, I thought that's a good point to make. But yeah, when it comes to consciousness, it's not something that you can hold. It's irreducible, and it seems indestructible, especially if you consider that it's fundamental. Consciousness is dimensionless, and yet to me it's like a radiant emptiness, and yet it can give rise to multiple dimensions, and that's how I see it. It's uncaused. I don't know what kind of explanation would satisfy us about the phenomenon of consciousness, other than to say that it's fundamental. It can be any other way. Absolute nothingness cannot exist. If it's defined as nothing, then it can't possibly have an appearance in existence. So therefore there always has to be something. And if you remove physical worlds, and even if you remove mathematics, you would be left with experience itself. Experience, or an awareness, a pure awareness, a pristine cognition, with great potential to experience worlds of qualia. That's how I see it. And this potential manifests as long as there are concepts, especially eternal concepts such as mathematics, which can exist for all time and are immutable and independent of minds and physical worlds. Then if you get something like consciousness, it can breathe fire through the equations. It can bring to life the very concept of mathematics and its own infinities. It shines a light on everything. And yeah, I think that's what consciousness is. It's to me, for so long it has been a deep mystery, but at the same time, you can also flip the coin, to say that it's what we know most intimately, and what we see around us is what's mysterious, because, you know, what is matter? What does it mean to say that something is physical? Because it doesn't say anything about its essence. Matter is just things that we observe to behave in particular ways, and that's it really. And all we have is explanations that may or may not satisfy us, and we can always go further and ask why, until finally we grasp certain concepts, until finally we reify or solidify things in our heads, in our mental models of reality, to be able to say, oh, okay, all right, no need to go any further. I get it now. Yeah, so, yeah, but consciousness has always been the ultimate mystery. I'm not even impressed by the question, why is there something rather than nothing? At least not since I read the book Why the World Exists by Nick Holt, and there's another one, Why There's Something Rather Than Nothing, I think, by Lawrence Krauss. Basically, these physicists tell us that at the quantum level, a state of nothingness is highly improbable, and the potential for something to emerge, to be, is enormous. Therefore, the reason why there's something rather than nothing. In fact, I could sum up. I could give you the gist of Nick Holt's book. Why is there something rather than nothing? Well, in the beginning there were no laws. Laws are restrictions, and if there are no restrictions, then everything is permitted. And if everything is permitted, voila, the Big Bang, or several Big Bangs, because there's nothing to prevent other Big Bangs from taking place. And you can get an infinity of worlds within the framework of space-time, and perhaps there are other worlds which we can't even possibly imagine from the anthropic perspective, but they are out there. So that's pretty much the gist of my current paradigm. I think we are headed somewhere, and the sooner we get used to the idea that space-time isn't fundamental, the quicker we can progress in terms of physics, new physics, and then we can be more open to certain spiritual concepts like reincarnation, and the possibility that we don't really die. And and this worldview, which seems to be reinforced by recent discoveries, and the views that have been recently expressed by people like Donald Hoffman and Bernardo Kastrup. And I love their, the analogies they come up with for our perspective of the world, that the world isn't exactly what it seems. I like Kastrup's analogy, apart from Donald Hoffman's computer analogy, that we are practically piloting aeroplanes, and we can interact with the interface efficiently, and we can pilot the plane and fly the plane and land the plane without having to look outside the plane. All we have to do is look at the dashboard and the screens and the controls on it in order to land safely. But the dashboard inside the cockpit isn't what the world really looks like. So there you have it. But yeah, I think we're headed somewhere, and I'd like to explore consciousness. I'm an avid lucid dreamer. I dabble in meditation, in mindfulness, more recently in visualization exercises and meditation, and I'm open to other possibilities, like, there may be the possibility of remote viewing and telepathy, and it might not always work. It depends on certain conditions. We can't be closed off to other possibilities. We have to entertain them and find out what's true. I care about what's true, and I would have still been a physicalist had it not been for the recent discoveries in science, and the fact that those scientists last year won the Nobel Prize in physics, and everything else that's been happening this year regarding consciousness, and conferences where they're baffled, and the fact that the leading theory of consciousness was panned by experts themselves this year. So all of this makes me lean more to, and the fact that the physicists last year themselves have now abandoned materialism in favor of idealism. So I take all of that into account. I just care about where the evidence leads. I'd like to think that I always remain epistemologically consistent, and I never say that I am sure of something with 100% certainty other than my own experience. So there you have it. Yeah, I lucid dream. Sometimes I get together with the guys at the non-physical channel that you should definitely check out. My friend Claudio Soprano and Michael S. Lee, they do their own thing, which is amazing. They are consciousness explorers, and they're open to other possibilities, and I think they do a great thing there, and I think everyone should check out their channel, the non-physical. I also use altered states of mind to inspire my artwork. I'm an artist. I don't produce art from I don't produce art with the attitude that I must create something that I think others would like. I produce art to please myself. The outcome of my efforts have to reach the threshold of the sublime. If I think that I've produced a subliminal form of expression, which is the very definition of art, then I'm happy with that. And you can you can check out my art on Instagram, on Facebook. Yeah, those are my details. Don't know if you can see them. Basically, I'm going to read this out. Arlindo Batista Visual Artist on Facebook. Arlindo _ visual _ art on Instagram. And yeah, you've got my email address, arlindobatista@yahoo.co.uk. And basically you can get in touch with me if you would like to buy any art. If you think, have a look at my art, if you like any of it. We all have to make a living. Yeah, I enjoy producing art. If I can make some money on the side, then it's a bonus. If you don't like my art, if you don't want to get it, then it's your prerogative. I really don't care. I'm just putting it out there. So thank you very much for listening, and I shall be making more videos about other topics. Thank you very much.